Today at shopdap.com, we're going to be installing 034 drivetrain inserts on our B8.5 S4. Okay, so today we're going to be installing drivetrain inserts on our B8, and there are 3 of them. So these 2 circular ones are for the rear differential, and then this one is for the transmission. Basically what these do is these aluminum inserts go in place and fill the void of the rubber bushing. So in this case, it should stiffen up some of the launching of the car. So, anytime you have all-wheel drive, as soon as the tires grip, because you're not going to get any slipping, it's going to now shift the drivetrain of the vehicle, meaning the engine, transmission, and then the rear differential. So these should help us with preventing as much of that transition as possible and should stiffen things up. The benefit of this over poly is polyurethane will get more just general vibration, whereas these are not going to do so until the void is going to be filled by the movement of the bushing, and then you're going to get that stiffness kind of come into play then. Under normal operating circumstances, these are not going to change the stiffness too much of any of your drivetrain stuff until you really start to hit it into it and cause it to prevent the bushing from flexing further beyond its normal operation. So let's get into our install. All right, so here is going to be our trans mounts we're going to be taking out, and these are triple squares. And we're just going to break them loose. And then get this completely unscrewed. Now we will link to our triple square sets that we have available because you may or may not have triple squares, and they are a requirement for this. Okay, so we have our plate, and we're going to slide this in place, and as you can see, it just fills up the holes that are around here. And so as things would shift, they would move back and forth. So what you're doing is just filling up those gaps with this plate, and then we can thread our bolts in. And then we're just going to snug these up, and the torque spec on these is 20 Newton meters, and we're going to torque them down. And they do recommend from 034 that you actually use blue Loctite on these, and we will link to these bolts in the description where you can find them. Okay, so here's our other bushing we're going to be working with. This is where your drive shaft comes from up front, and this is your carrier bearing between the rear differential and then the drive shaft. So we're going to remove this 16 millimeter bolt. Now, you can either try to push this up by hand, or you can use some sort of post jack, but we're going to be getting up here to mount this in place. Now you need to get enough clearance to drop this bushing in place. All right, so yeah, as you've seen here, we have the pole jack in place. I tried to do it without it. Frankly, it's kind of a pain. So this makes your life a lot easier. So if you don't have a pole jack, obviously you're not gonna likely have a pole jack, and you'll be on maybe jack stands or something of that nature. You could use a floor jack and maybe a piece of wood that you could stick up in there and allow you to jack that thing up. Now, super easy to get it up and down. In that case, the only thing I suspect will be a problem is getting this thing lined up. So we're going to get this thing back down and make sure before we get the insert in that we actually have it lined up where we need it to be. Okay, so we did line our bolt up, and it does thread in. So we know we're good there. So what I'm going to do is back this back out, and you make sure you have the correct orientation. As you see, this has the correct slots, that it goes horizontally in this spot. So usually what you can do is get that in there and then wiggle it a little bit to get this in place. And you will want to make sure that when you're tightening these, that you don't just keep tightening it if you can't find the threads, because you can cause some damage. I always made sure that it was threaded in there before I started using a ratchet. That way you don't have to worry about it. And we will link to this bolt as well. And this is tightened to 55 Newton meters. Okay, so now we are ready to move on to our rear ones. These are going to be the differential mounts. So this car has a sport diff. As you can see here, you have some solenoids and the actuator, and then the mounts are here and here. So we are going to remove these bolts, but before we do that, you want to make sure you have the differential supported so it doesn't fall on you. So you are going to want to make sure that you support it however it is you're going to do so carefully, because you don't want to do any damage to the differential. So we're going to make sure we jack it up until we got some good tension on it. Make sure you give it a little wiggle and get that in place. You also may want to, just if you want to be comfortable, use a block of wood, put it in place to make sure you don't have anything damaged along the way. You will want to make sure you stay away from all these solenoids, because if you try to jack from one of these things, you will destroy it, and that will probably cost you a lot of money. So we're going to go ahead and hold there and then show you removing these bolts up here. Okay, so I've unclipped this harness right here just so we can get visibility. You probably won't need to, but we will get that cracked loose. And it's an 18 millimeter. And you can see we got a little too much tension on this because the differential shifted up as we were doing so. So what I'm going to do is let this down to the point where I feel this bolt loose. And that feels like we may be able to loosen it by hand, which means we have the correct amount of pressure on this differential. Yep. So you should be able to back this bolt out by hand. Otherwise, you have too much pressure on your differential with your jack or whatever it is you're using to hold it. Okay, so we are going to install our new bolt. We have this lubricated, but we're also going to use the bolt to assist us. So we're going to get this thing mounted in place with the correct orientation, and then we're going to thread this bolt in to help us pull this thing to where it belongs. So we have that in place. We can watch as this bushing just pulls in to where it belongs. Now, if you have this thing binding too much, you're going to want to make sure you just keep an eye on it, make sure it's going in smoothly. It doesn't cock to the side in one way, because that would give you an indication that it's hanging up on something. If you are hanging up, you want to stop, back out, figure out what's going on, and then reset. All right. And we'll snug this one up, and then we're just going to torque them in place once we get them both done. Okay, so here we have our other one. And this is on the driver's side. I'm going to break this one loose. And just like the other side, we have it lubricated, and then we're going to get our bolt in there, get it lined up, get the insert lined up to thread this in to help us pull that thing in place. All right, now it's snugged up, and we can torque these to 55 Newton meters, and we have completed our install. And you've now completed your drivetrain insert install. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more like it.